Okay, welcome back to Inspiration Education.
Woohoo! Here we are. We're back. We're back. Episode number
36. I looked it up.
It's what?
36.
Wow. Because you know what day of the week is it? Blur's Day. So I think our episode numbers, it's like Blur episode.
Quick plug on our channel here. This is episode 36 of our normal content, but we've got some new stuff going up. The social history interview project for our high school students. So
Yep, you're up to about episode 21 or so on that.
We are. So please do check that out if you get the chance. Those are interviews that our high school students are doing, learning about social history.
So this is part 3 of a series. We started with accommodations and modifications and talking about some common disability types. But this episode is focusing on distance learning. As an administrator, as I've been thinking, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We will face distance learning again next year. There undoubtedly, we will have to think proactively about having to deal with distance learning. So we are really excited to put together this episode.
Absolutely. And so we want to reintroduce, this is Miss Carrie Johnston.
So Carrie, before you started, did you want to give our listeners a task before we get into our content?
Sure do. So I want everyone to think about a single student that you have, either that was in your regular classroom or your online classroom now, one that you either kind of struggle with, you know, the ones where you're like, are they being lazy, or maybe a combination of being lazy, or just a student that you struggle with and you don't quite get how they operate, how they function. It may even be a student that you have to really, really try hard to love. So keep that student in mind as we go through this, and my hope is that you have some better insight into them, you know, so at the end of this episode.
So where's a good place to start here, Carrie, to transition from where we were last time to where we are now?
Well, in the last episode, we kind of talked about some common disability types that we see, things like autism, ADHD, ADD, dyslexia, visual processing issues, language delays. Anyway, but one thing that almost all of those things have in common is something called executive functioning disorder. And so having good executive functioning skills is something that takes about 2 to 3 decades to fully develop. Basically, it happens up in the prefrontal cortex of our brain. It's like our thinking brain. Okay, so thinking about a student that you may struggle with, or you know, don't see the greatest performance with, see some of these issues that are over on the left, where that you see, whether they're impulsive in class or they move too much, they're non-compliant, they argue everything, they're defiant, excessive talking, off task, rude or talking back. Some of the other things that are in there, they don't turn in homework. So if you look over where it says under frontal lobe, that's where executive functioning occurs. And for every issue and behavior that you see, you can see the reason, the part of executive functioning that actually controls that behavior. And so we'll talk about it later in the episode, how these things actually manifest in these behaviors. So hopefully it gives you a better understanding as to why you're seeing what you're seeing from your student.
Yeah, another one that's under issues, if you will, is we might be asking ourselves as teachers, well, why doesn't that student just come to me and ask me? Well, that you see as an issue, but look at down there under the frontal lobe, motivation.
Yep.
They don't have that ability sometimes to be able to ask. So it isn't an issue, it's an actual, you know, disconnect in that executive functioning.
Right. And the self-reflection piece, you don't see it listed up here, but students with executive functioning disorders often have a hard time with self-reflection. They don't know what they don't know. And so they don't know to come and ask. They just know they're confused. But if you don't know what specific question to ask, oftentimes you just won't ask it. You will get some of those students that just come and say, I'm confused. Okay, but then there's the other ones that are like, well, if I don't know what I'm confused about, I'm not going to risk looking stupid. I'm not going to ask a question. if you've ever experienced a kid who they just have no sense of time whatsoever. They don't realize that time is actually elapsing.
Sounds like my son. He's 16 and in high school.
And mine too, who's in 5th grade. Yeah. So, but it also helps with, it controls like mood and inhibition and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes you'll see students who have executive functioning disabilities will also have a little bit of erratic moods at times. They get, they tend to be really sensitive about stuff. They don't take criticism as well. And so those are the executive functioning skills. It basically allows us to plan and organize and initiate and continue to complete a task. So you may have a student who starts a whole lot of tasks and never finishes a single one of them, or they do their homework and they don't turn it in. Those are all signs of executive functioning disorders. Yeah.
Sound like any of those students that you might be thinking of in your head right now?
Probably so. I can think of numerous students that we see that with, and and I even struggle with it as a parent and as a teacher in special education, that sometimes I'm like, we just went through this, and then I have to back up and remember what I know about these students. And oftentimes we see, by the time they get to high school, they have gotten, it's really sad, they have gotten so used to failing, so used to not measuring up.
Right.
So used to being told that they're lazy, or why can't you just do this? Or, are we going through this again? And they get really deflated. So a lot of times students with any disability, but when you see executive functioning stuff, they require a lot of positive talk. They require a lot of positive reinforcement.
Carrie, that sounds like mental abuse.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think it really easily can become that way. And, to be very transparent with you, if I were to call my son in here, I think he would probably tell you that he has felt abused at times with my own language, my own frustration, where I have even said to him, and this is what I do for a living. But when you're confronted with this stuff, day by day, moment by moment, especially in this online learning environment where I am having to sit with him for most tasks all day long, and I don't get a break from it. And I'm trying to constantly control his emotional dysregulation that I'm seeing because he's frustrated. I know better. And I've even said, gosh, can we just stay on task?
Well, and Carrie, for those who haven't seen the previous episodes, why don't you just give a quick rundown of some of the things that your child deals with?
Right. So my son has something called autoimmuneencephalopathy, and he has multiple genetic abnormalities as well. He looks completely typical from the outside, but he has really poor executive functioning skills. He has very short task focus, and he is emotionally dysregulated. He basically goes into fight or flight pretty quickly. And it's not something that he can help. It's not something he can control. He's being treated for it, but we can only do what we can. And so
he's the neatest kid, though. I love him. He's hilarious.
He is a character. He's brilliant, but his poor little mind can't slow down enough to be able to produce the kind of work that somebody's asking for.
So here's the rub. I mean, your son is so fortunate to have a mom with the time and the skill set. So we as teachers have to take a pause and realize, okay, those kids that we're thinking about, I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. How many of our students who are struggling with online learning just, are typical learners. Now think about our special ed kids and what they're dealing with. And then we really have to pause and think, do they have the support at home? And it's not because the parents don't care, it's they don't have the time or the skill set, or the student has younger siblings that they're having to babysit. I mean, there is so many reasons where a kid can't sit down and have someone help them focus.
Mhm.
And so we really have to think in very innovatively about how we can address that, and very specific strategies.
Yeah.
Tell us what is and maybe this is helpful for both parents and teachers. What is one way you taught your son to look at the load, to look at what he's up against?
Mhm.
So, well, like I said before, I'm pretty transparent about stuff. I believe that God gave me my son for a reason to help me help others. And so one particular morning, he lost his cool and had a pretty massive rage, which he has happened. And I knew in my mama's heart it was because he just felt so overwhelmed by getting onto Google Classroom and seeing, 6 or 7 tasks, and all he sees is the tasks. So once he calmed down, I just prayed and asked, like, how can I get him to see what I see about this task? So I took him outside into our backyard, and we have a brick backyard, or a brick wall around our backyard. And I took him out and I stood him in front of the brick wall and I said, Kevin, if I were to tell you that I need you to take this whole section of wall and I need you to move it over there, would you be able to do it if I just asked you to pick up this whole wall and move it? And he's just like, no, there's no way I could do that. And I said, okay, what if I told you I'm going to give you one brick at a time and I want you to go take it over there? Would you be able to do it? And he said, yes. And I said, your class load and your work is just like this brick wall. So I'm going to take away the brick wall from you. I don't want you to look at the brick wall. I'm going to give you one brick at a time. And that's going to be one assignment at a time. And so that was several weeks ago, and it totally clicked for him. And now every time I start to see him, I've got so many things to do. I'll say, are you looking at the brick wall or are you looking at the brick? And he'll say, I'm looking at the brick wall. And I said, okay, let me give you a brick. And he's able to do it. So oftentimes when they're younger, they need another person. They need a grown-up to help make a checklist for them, or just give them a little brick or a little nugget one at a time. And that teaches them how to actually overcome this, because executive functioning disorders, for kids with disability, executive functioning doesn't often go away. The struggle. It's usually a lifelong thing. What they do is, as they develop their prefrontal cortex, their thinking brain, they're actually able to compensate and come up with ways to help themselves through their disability. But that's something that has to be learned and usually like explicitly taught. A typical student who's just developing typically will have lower executive functioning skills just by nature that their brain isn't developed yet. And as they get older, into their 20s, young 20s, it's typically fully developed. So
I love that brick by brick comparison. That can be used in so many different ways in the classroom. Something quickly that I was thinking of is, a big summative assessment, the semester-long project that we just quickly plugged at the beginning of this episode. The paper was like 4 pages long when I first gave it to them, which is the whole brick wall. But by breaking it up into 10 steps, I got a lot of feedback from the students. I'm doing some debriefs, and they were very appreciative of breaking it up for them in that way. But going back to the online classroom, making things into more chunked or manageable parts, I think, is a really important piece of making the online classroom successful. For example, giving one assignment at a time. Like if you're using Google Classroom out there, instead of overloading the stream with a bunch of things, pick one assignment per week, or a max of 2, because you have to remember that it isn't just your classroom that these students are dealing with. I mean, in college, for example, a college student might have 2 or 3 classes at a time max. From the middle school and high school level, they're taking 7 or 8 classes at a time. So if you're posting more than 2 assignments a week and you multiply that by 7 or 8, that's a heavy load.
Right.
So if you can just chunk it.
And you can even chunk even further. Remember, and I imagine other platforms are similar, but with Google Classroom, you can select and deselect who you're sending work to. So in your announcement stream, you select certain students, you send them the assignment for the day or for the next couple days or whatever, or for the week. But then you select and deselect perhaps some of your skill center students, or what we would call our skill center students, and you give them the first step to do that one assignment, right? And then say, okay, once you've done that, then check in with me and we'll move on. So we have to scaffold it even further for some of our kids. And that's not enabling them or doing them a disservice. It's actually doing them a service. Like you said, we don't want to demoralize them. We want to take care of them so that they can feel successful.
That's a great example of an accommodation where you haven't changed the work. You've just helped them with that executive functioning skills that you're talking about by organizing it for them, right, Carrie?
Yes, yeah, that helps many students. The one thing I can say about, I think teachers looking or watching this will say, well, gosh, I could do that for all my students. The one thing I will caution you about, and this is where our last episode, we talked about knowing your students. Some students need to know what the bigger picture is first.
Yeah.
And so if we just give certain students little nuggets, they're like, well, what am I working towards?
What's the point?
So, good point.
The point of this, right? I'm actually that way. I want to know what is the end product that I need. Okay, and now I'm going to break it down into little steps about how I get there.
Yeah.
And so there are ways to do that. Just saying this is what we're going to go for. We're going to take little baby steps, little bricks to get there.
Since we're talking about different ways that we can make our students more successful online, you had mentioned earlier that some teachers are more flexible with their due dates and some teachers are more rigid with their due dates. And I have found that one thing that our school has done well in this, that we implemented on the fly, is that we came up with a schedule of when teachers can post something in their classroom. So like, this discipline, if it was like social studies, these disciplines post on Mondays, science disciplines post on Tuesdays, and so forth. And then the student would typically have they would have a week or something like that until the next posting would come, when the next mini video recording of myself giving a lecture about this is what we're doing this week and this is what you'll be working on. So that the entire high school followed that model. And I've gotten feedback from our students that said that they really appreciate that. And then with the due dates, we have implemented something where there isn't anything due on a weekend, so that the student goes into that mentally and knows that whatever I assign that the weekend is free and that's theirs to have and to own. And when Monday comes, Monday through Friday is for academics, and then they have that weekend off. So I think if your school, for the remainder of this school year, if you're even having school, or as you go into the new school year, because like you were saying, Meg, the chances are very good that we're going to have some sort of online class of some kind going into the future. So if you can't get on some sort of program like that with your school where everything is very specific and planned according to a calendar.
And what we're even talking about is and again, this goes back to the executive functioning piece, is that every teacher hosts in a similar manner. We don't clutter up the announcement stream. We structure all the units the same, so that when a kid opens up a classroom environment, it's all laid out the same, it's all structured the same, organized the same, there's no surprises. And it's keep it simple, stupid, right? This idea that if a kid goes in knowing what to expect, then it's a win.
I think, Meg, our viewers might be wondering, well, what does that look like? How can all the classes look the same? And I'll just give a quick example. Our principal asked that all of the videos that we upload each week, they're like those mini lectures, they're all titled the same thing. So week of April 4th, and then mine would be called U.S. history and yours was called science or biology or something like that. So that's just one way in which we can try to keep things organized and easy for them to follow.
I have thoughts on both what you guys were saying. The weekends are very important for some downtime, but something else that if you give some flexible due dates, and if you have students with disabilities, they most likely have an accommodation of extended time.
Yeah.
So let's say you have an assignment that's due on a Friday. Well, they can have it due on Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah.
One thing I notice is that because the classes, there are, they're boom, boom, boom. They've got tasks. They're constantly in task mode during the week. They may actually choose to do an assignment over the weekend because it's so much more relaxed. They'll say, okay, well, this one I know is going to take me a little bit longer, so I'm going to put it off for the week and get all these other smaller tasks done. And then on Sunday, I'm going to work on this. And so they've had a day to kind of rest. So that flexibility is really helpful for some students to know that they have control to save one or two assignments for the weekend that they can just kind of put off and not worry about. And have, it feels, the weekend in general just feels a little bit more relaxed. And then if I can, do you mind right now if I share my screen with the executive functioning thing?
Please.
I wanted to address. Okay, so when it, down at the very bottom, when it says many repetitions to learn a new task, think about that with your students learning, one, just how to use Google Classroom or whatever online platform you're using. Just because they're tech savvy in things like TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram and texting does not mean that they know how to actually use this online platform well.
Right.
Yeah, side note, at the beginning of the new year, I think schools have to train their students how to use the online platform. Have to do it. And that's going to help a ton right there.
I think so too. I think that's so valid. It's true. And then when you guys say, try to keep things as standardized or the same throughout your school as possible, because if you imagine a student going to each one of their Google Classrooms and it's structured completely differently, that takes so much of their time just to try to figure out what to do.
That's a new task, right?
It's a brand new task. And I have had through this, some of my students, I've had a few of them complain saying, when I'm asked to go and answer this question or do this, and I have to go back and search through my classroom to figure out where those questions are. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. I'm constantly having to search through a sea. In our minds, we think, oh, well, we have it organized. We've got it titled different sections, and then there's the Google Drive, and so they can go find this slideshow presentation here or there. What I've found for my students is that, let's say you have a presentation that has like questions on it or a graphic organizer or whatnot. It's best to just repost it in the assignment.
Yeah.
Even if you've reposted it 5 times.
Yep, every time.
Every time, because then they don't have to go back through, this long list of assignments for that unit to find it.
Yeah, another quick example of that is, for the last couple of weeks, I've had the students are filling in a spreadsheet. Each spreadsheet is each cell within the spreadsheet for them is a different week, but I'm reattaching that same spreadsheet each time I post the assignment. We might think, why do I have to repost the same, Google Doc or whatever it is to the assignment every week? That seems silly. Maybe it's like you might think it's a dumbing down or something. Mm-hmm. But again, you have to remember how many things these students are having to filter through every week. It's so simple for us as teachers to just attach the same document. If they're using the same document every week, attach it to the assignment and you're done. I think visuals are always a good thing, and perhaps I should share my screen and show what I was talking about. Okay, so here's the stream for my US history class, and you can see that I very, very rarely post something on my stream. For example, here's May 4th, and the last time I posted something on my stream was April 15th. And then I have, 40 something students in this particular class. This particular assignment, I only sent to 8 students. So for example, you can go right here to share or to post something. And right here is where you can click on, and then it'll pop up a list with your students, and you can deselect the students that you don't want to receive a particular message on your stream. But like we were saying, you want to keep your stream as empty as possible because it gets lost. It's like your Facebook stream or your Instagram stream where it just goes down and down and down, and you have to scroll through to try to find something. And who has time for that these days, especially? So the way that you can kind of,
Cassie, it also shows up every time a teacher posts an assignment or something in the stream, it shows up in the student's email. And if they've got that multiplied by however many classes they have, they really just start hitting delete. They just stop reading it. It's just too much.
Right, exactly. You'll notice that what is on the stream is not an assignment. I will never, ever post an assignment on the stream.
Right.
That's what the classwork tab is for. And so you would go to your classwork tab, and here is where you're going to keep things organized according to, you know, this would have been like unit 7 for me. If we'd had a regular classroom, we would have been talking about specific content. But you can see that each assignment in here belongs under here. And so then, for example, this assignment has the spreadsheet attached that I had mentioned. They're going in and they're just selecting a topic. The next week, they had something else that was due on the same spreadsheet, and I attached the spreadsheet again, and so forth. All of these are dealing with the spreadsheet, and here's my video, the lecture videos, and that sort of thing. So that you can see that's sort of the visual of what I meant by attaching the same document to the assignment week after week after week, so that by the time I get here and I'm a student, I'm not having to go down and try to find the first assignment that was made 4 weeks ago and find the spreadsheet that I need. I've done
a great strategy
to help them with that executive functioning.
That's really good.
Why don't you talk a tiny bit more about this list here, you know, because we, you know, you asked us to think about a student. So how can we connect that student to some of the things on this list?
Yeah.
So we are often, if you imagine what your Google Classroom looks like, you know, we're posting assignments. And so when the student gets in and they see all these colored assignments, boom, 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 even though on there it says due date, like some might be due tomorrow, some might be due in 3 or 4 days, some might be due in 2 weeks. Because if you see that first thing up there on the executive functioning slide, this planning and organization, that they lack the ability to do that, which is why we want to keep it clear and concise and only give them one little nugget at a time, because in their mind, they're seeing that brick wall. They don't know which brick to tackle first, even though you see the due dates. And so they may spend tons of time on one little assignment because they don't know how to prioritize that one over another one. So you have to prioritize for them.
I'll give a great example of that, Carrie. My girls, I have twin girls in 6th grade, and one of their teachers posted 10 assignments on one day. Now, some were big assignments, some were little assignments, some would take 1 minute, some are going to take a couple of days, some were due the next day, and some were due way out in the future. And Google Classroom organized all of that for them. This is due this day, this is not due until way down here. But in their minds, they were like,
it was the brick wall.
It was the brick wall. And it was either, so one of them was just like, I quit. And the other one saw it as, I'm going to do all of that class first before I get to the next class, and couldn't do the functioning of do this in this class because it's due now, and then skip to the next class because it's due here.
Right. Wow. Wow.
So it's really, really important that we as teachers don't post 10 things at one time.
Right. Well, and what happens when they don't have a mom that's a teacher? What happens when, you know, we've got parents who send their children to school to us for a purpose, and that's because they want us to teach them. And so we basically now put that task on the parents, and the parents don't know. They can't read the minds of the teachers. They don't know how to help their student organize because they're not doing it on a daily basis. And so it just goes to show that that's not the best way to do it, to post that many assignments at once. But we as teachers are learning too. And so hopefully what we're doing right now will get
Right.
out to teachers and help you guys. We just want to help. That's our whole goal here, is to all join together and figure out our way on through this.
Yeah.
So,
That's really important to note, that we're not condemning teachers, because I'm sitting in the same seat where I started out. I violated this entire list right here for all my students.
We were
And
trying
it
to
and
figure this out.
yeah, we were figuring it out. So yeah, no shame, no shame
No.
here for anyone.
100%. We all for sure have the best intentions. And I mean, I very well could have been that teacher that said, I'm going to post all 10 of these so they can see. And in my mind, I'm thinking that could be very helpful for them.
right.
You know, it's a learning process. It's like trying to ride a bike for the first time.
Right, and the only shame might be is if we learn about these things and then we don't change. We don't take innovations to do what is right for the unique learning needs of every kid.
Yeah.
Anything else in this list you wanted to hit, Carrie?
Self-motivation, because I think that's one that will directly tie into that student that we're thinking about.
That perhaps we've put a false label on.
Right. Oftentimes the you're being lazy. Self-motivation is not just another word for lazy. It's that their brain literally lacks the ability to motivate them into task management or doing a task. They don't produce the right brain waves. They don't produce the right neurotransmitters to actually do that. And so oftentimes external rewards and positive reinforcement helps that. So if you even see a student start a task and maybe it's only they turn in half the work, motivation comes by saying, wow, this is really good stuff. I'd like you to fill in this next line or these next two problems or whatnot. Just giving them a lot of positive reinforcement.
Great, because I wanted to directly comment on that, because again, what are our strategies for online learning? So how are you going to give that positive feedback, again, not to just one kid, but to all your kids? We have to come up with ways in which we can, what we can normally do in the classroom, monitor and adjust, right? Checks for understanding, all those things. We have to get creative about how we're going to do that in the online environment. What I've been reading is we have to humanize this online environment, and self-reflection, student self-reflection has been the #1 way in which to do that. Hey, send me a 1-minute video on where you're at right now, right? Which is what we would do in the classroom, right? Like, hey, where are you at on this? So we have to humanize their online experience. Think about a teacher who has 6 preps. You start multiplying the number of kids, and you don't you don't want to get lost in the weeds either. So how do we balance that?
Some students need more relationship with teachers than others. Some students are okay with just having that kind of superficial relationship of you're teaching me, I'm learning, I produce the work, you give me the grade, I'm good to go.
One way that I have found to be able to give personalized feedback quickly that I'm confident students are getting is when you are grading in Google Classroom. So a quick way for me that I've been able to do this is, let's say I use a 4-point grading scale. So, all of these students are getting 4s, and then I'll hit the checkbox to return for those students. And I will give personalized feedback that it's personalized for the students.
Yeah, in the comment bar.
In that grade.
Yeah.
That grade level. And so then I'll say, great job. You've hit all of the points in the rubric, whatever it is that I say, and boom. And all, 50 students get that feedback. And then I go through and I return all of the 3s. And I'll say, you needed to do this, that, and the other thing. So that might be one way.
Oh, that's cool.
Where you can give personalized feedback for specific students on a big grand scale to keep.
That's a great idea.
That's good.
Good call. So how do we take care of those students when we distance learn? Like kids who are supposed to have assistance during test taking. What are we going to do? What do you think?
Well, it's going to require, to be honest, the only real way to make sure that they have the assistance that they need is it's going to require man hours on our part. We are probably going to have to schedule times with them to take a test while they have us either on the phone or on a video call. Because typically if you've got a student that is going to be taking a test with somebody in the room with them specifically to aid and assist them, we still have to provide that for them. And so that may mean that, if you've got 5 kids taking the same test, you're going to have to stagger it because you need to be with that student individually. Otherwise, it's not really assessing what they know, it's assessing what the group knows.
Exactly. And this reminds us that we have to think innovatively about our summatives, that maybe tests are not the best thing to utilize in an online learning environment.
What would you say, do accommodations, the way that we accommodate as a teacher, does that change in the online environment?
Yes and no, just based on the fact that we're not face to face. For example, if an accommodation that you're giving a student in the classroom is that instead of having them write down answers on a test, you have them tell you, that's going to require a video call. Or you can say, hey, just tell me what you know in this and record it and send it to me. And so that is still an accommodation that you can give to them. It's easy to give extended time. That's an accommodation. One thing you can do is provide them a link to an audio version of a book that you're trying to get them to read. Or we actually use something called Snap and Read. It's a program that we've purchased the rights to. And you can actually have the computer read anything that's digital, PDF, website. You basically grab it and highlight it and it will read it to you. That way, if they struggle with actually reading it. But once again, that's something that the students hadn't really been taught how to use very well. And so I've only got a few students that are using it. So that's
another task to learn.
It's another task to learn, and it's going to be something that I'm going to have to show them how to do over a video call. So it still is going to require, I think, quite a bit of face time to be able to do this well, at least in the beginning. And then kind of taking the scope back from the details, and go more broad scope of what we're trying to get them to know and learn and understand. It's going to be more difficult to teach them how to write a research paper. I typically, when we're writing research papers at school, myself and my staff, we spend lots of one-on-one time with our students, showing them how to do an MLA citation, showing them how to organize a paper. So providing them different graphic organizers that will break down step by step for them. I create a lot of my own graphic organizers based on what I know about the assignment. And so literally just making it tiny little steps so that they can take that and just start writing their paragraph, or they can take that during a video call and tell me what they want to write, and I'm typing it into a document for them. So.
Yeah, in the land of the unknown of next year, I'm thinking we're going to have to do a lot of very task-specific training. And at the beginning of the year, let's hope that we do have time in the classroom where we can be together. We're going to need a triage. What are the skills we have to train up in ourselves and in the kiddos so that when we do go online, it can run a lot more fluidly? I think that every school, this is something our school is doing, is that we are examining and identifying what are the skills we need to teach, again, for teachers ourselves and our students, so that we can set ourselves up for best case scenario.
Wow, you and I think so similarly, because as I was listening to Carrie, I was along the same lines. And something else that I'd like to add to that is, as she's mentioning some of these new software programs that have become, well, they've probably always been available, but we're just now like, whoa, look at all the cool things, right, out of a sheer necessity. And I think that, because teachers, we get paid year round. We're off in the summer, but we're not really off in the summer. All of you out there know exactly what I'm talking about. We work in the summertime. And I think going into this new year with the inevitable distance learning classroom, we need to be assessing how we manage these last months of school for this spring and decide what are the software programs that we want our students to at least know are available and maybe poke around in over the summertime. Send those home as an email to the folks so that, for example, what was the one that you mentioned, Carrie?
Snap and read.
Snap and read. So if that's something that I think I would like to use in my classroom for certain students, I should send home over the summertime to those specific families, hey, I'd like for you in preparation for my class in the upcoming year to take a look at this website and familiarize yourself with it. I'm still going to give you the step-by-step when we get into the classroom, but it'll be very helpful if you can familiarize yourself with it over the summertime. So Carrie, what about modifications? What are modifications? I think first of all, in case our viewers didn't get to see episode 1 and episode 2, maybe just a quick reiteration of what a modification is, how we do that in the classroom, in a normal classroom, and then do you see that changing, or have you seen that change in these last couple of months of distance learning?
So a modification is basically changing the what you're teaching a student or what you expect them to learn and know. So if, let's say you have 10 core standards that you teach for a class, they may only be expected to know 5 of them. And so the rest of them they are being exposed to, but you're not really assessing whether they've mastered that concept or not, because they don't need to as a modification. I have seen a little bit of that. I've actually seen, at least with this very, we kind of got pushed over the cliff into this online platform. I've seen the need for more modifications. I've actually seen the need for more modifications for students that would typically just be getting accommodations. So students that are just kind of on that cusp of, they usually just need more time, or they need a little bit more assistance in guidance in writing or comprehending what they're reading, but they're able to do all the work. It just takes them a little bit longer. I've seen some of those students actually require modifications. And so we as a school, myself, has made some of the decisions to say, you know what, we're going to give these particular students the modified version of this assignment. Because without having the assistance of the teacher or a parapro or myself, I'm not sure that they can be successful. And I don't want to see their grade tanked because they don't have the option to come to me in the Skills Center and get help. And so we've made the decision to actually start doing modification.
So Carrie, something that I wrote down that I was hoping that you might be able to share with us as the lead in our Skills Center, what have you found, or what can you share with us in terms of how those students are handling the online classroom?
What are you hearing from them?
That we teachers don't know? How are they handling this?
Most of them are not handling it very well, to be honest. They require a level of interaction that we have not been able to provide for them at this time. They require a lot more questions and direct answers frequently as they're working through an assignment. They get confused about knowing what it is that you're actually looking for. And so, we have our office hours, and so they'll email or they'll text or they'll do something, and they may not get the immediate feedback based on what you saw on that slide talking about executive functioning. Their time management, organization, and planning skills aren't the greatest all the time. And so if they don't get that immediate feedback, they'll move on to something else and they'll forget to go back to it. And so then they'll turn in an assignment that hasn't been finished or completed, or they have like half of their thought or half of the answer.
And in your teacher mind, you're like, I told them how to do this 5 different times.
Right.
But we don't realize that because you're not getting the feedback, they're moving on.
Right.
And not going back. Wow.
Have you experienced any students express to you, like, I just want to give up, I don't want to be in school anymore? Or is it, or have you had the reverse too? Have you had more positive conversations? And
I have not had, with my particular students, I have not had the reverse. At least 80% of them that I've connected with have, by this time, have said, I'm done. I can't keep doing this. I don't care. I'm overwhelmed. I'm trying. I've had some of them where, I think I had mentioned this before in the other episodes, that I've had parents reach out and say, I can't get my kid out of bed. So this has been incredibly difficult for them. It's incredibly difficult for me to see them doing that, because I work very hard, and so does my staff, at keeping their spirits up. They have such a safe place with us, and they feel loved and encouraged, and like they can be successful when they're with us. And we haven't been able to do that for them on a daily basis, and that breaks my heart, because they're all so amazing. So this has been just really, really hard for them.
yeah.
So coming off talking about, the student perspective on these experiences, let's, again, as teachers, think about that kid that we were talking about earlier. Now try and think about, oh, okay, so what executive functioning skill might they be missing, right? And then, okay, what's a strategy that I am going to use with that kid? And do it tomorrow,
Right.
or in the next couple of days. I mean, we've got a lot going on ourselves, but what is one thing that you can take away from today that you can use for that one kid before the end of the school year? How about that?
And I'll take that one step further as well, because I think when we think of that one kid, we often struggle with the relationship with that student as well. So what is something that you can do within the next few days, the next week, to encourage that student?
Good.
Give them some kind of positive feedback. If they turned in half of an assignment, give them positive feedback on them. Because they're so much more likely to try to finish that assignment if they feel like they were respected and applauded for the effort that they did put in, versus, hey, you only did the half, don't do that again. They're just going to be like, well, I'm not going to finish it. So try to be encouraging to them, reach out. They need a lot more positive reinforcement than your typical student.
Wow. Wrapping up, I'm going to make people watch this. This has been so good. As we're, as I said at our school, we're planning for next year. I'm like, I'm going to make this required watching for the people on our task force, because this is stuff that we need to hear. Again, not just for all our kids, but yeah, specifically addressing our kids who have extra requirements from us.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot in this episode, but I would say that the biggest things that we should try to cling to as much as possible are the fact that accommodations and modifications don't end when you go to distance learning. And in fact, you have
Enhanced.
Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
They're enhanced. And sometimes, as you were saying, Carrie, that the students that only really needed an accommodation here or there are now moving into that modification realm. And we have to remember that. Yeah. We also need to remember that it isn't just our classroom that's out there online for them to do, that there are 6, 7, 8 classes that these students are taking. And we may not see the 1 or 2 assignments per week as something big or as a lot. But when you add that up and you multiply that by 8, that is a ton of work that students are having to do.
From an administrator to other administrators, a plea to take leadership and say, teachers, this is how we are going to structure it. As leaders, we do have to help our teachers out to serve our kids best.
And we saw an example of that in this episode, where in our school, we have a calendar of when different disciplines can post different things, and that due dates, you have certain due dates of things, and nothing's due over the weekend and that kind of thing. But Carrie, I love how you added into that not all due dates can be a Friday, that some students need extra time or they need to be able to work over the weekend, and that's fine if they want to take that route, but it isn't something that is forced upon them.
Right. And I encourage, anybody watching this, great job. First off, I mean, the fact that you're watching this means that you want to improve, you want to gain ideas, you want to become more innovative and reach out to these students. what I would really encourage are the teachers that feel like, when I do this, you know, I don't know how to do it, or if they can't get it in on Friday, somehow that's a reflection of a failure on the teacher's part. And that's not true. Doing this actually makes you a better teacher. And so, you know, reach out to people like myself or your special education director, parapros, people that have been doing this for a while, for ideas. And my encouragement is to go with them. This is what we do. This is all we do. And so if we're asking you to do something, please follow through with it. It's for the betterment of the student. It's the teachers that dig their heels in and refuse to budge, as somehow it's a reflection on their teaching style. They're the ones that are really setting our students up for failure. And it's really easy during this online learning to disengage and distance yourself from the struggles that these students are having emotionally and physically, but it is negatively impacting their health, their family's health, and their love or lack of love of learning for a lifetime.
You know, those are really strong words, Carrie, but I think that there may be some people out there that need to hear them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a perfect way to wrap this up, because you just preached it. That's right on the money. This is what we're here for.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up another episode of Inspiration Education. This was part 3 of accommodations and modifications. Hope that you got some big takeaways from this and that you can do them in your classroom. Don't forget to think about that one student that may be a little bit of a problem child, and then rethink that whole scenario and realize that there's some executive functioning probably going on there, and how can you make their life a little easier by doing some of that functioning for them so that they're more successful, not just in a regular classroom, but in this whole new world that we're living in with distance learning.
Right on.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for coming. Bye.
Thanks. See you next time.